And we're live. Hey guys, welcome to the next show in the Armchair Dragoons Digital Convention. Today we're going to be talking with Chris Atkins and Doug from Historical Board Gaming about Global War 1985, a new upcoming game that I think everyone is going to be real excited about because I know I am. And the first question I have for you guys is, when everybody sees this, they're going to know what I'm talking about. Are you guys going to be offering bibs to go with the game? Because everyone gets this, they're going to be drooling all over themselves.
Sure.
Thanks for having us, Mo. And yeah, maybe we can throw that in as an add-on, Doug.
There you go.
Optional bib for drooling.
Yeah.
So anyway, pleasure for me to be here. Chris, also known as Admiral Seabass on YouTube. Been designing this game for Doug for over 2 years now, Doug. I can't believe how long it's been, but nice to meet you.
Yeah, no, it's great to meet you. I mean, everybody knows, like we said backstage, it's like no longer the disembodied voice. Here's his face, because everybody that's been watching Admiral Seabass knows the voice and knows the videos and have seen the table and have just, drooled longingly over the game. And now we can actually see your face and get to talk to you. And of course, we've all seen Doug on his channel when he talks about historical board gaming. And it's great to have you as well, Doug. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to see Chris at the end of the month, going over for a play test. It'll be my third time over there. So
yeah,
nice little trek. So yeah, I appreciate it having me on as well.
No, it's great.
Actually, Doug will be here 2 weeks from today, in fact, for our next in-person play test, and got a great play test team. I've got a picture of the guys and a few gals that we've had play tests as well that I can show later. And yeah, Doug will be here in 2 weeks, and it's getting real now for this game. So it's been fun. Doug's been super supportive of this game design and what we're trying to do with it. So and Mo, again, man, thanks for your interest in this game, and I love your background. Can I just say? And
it's always great to have some classic movies in here.
No kidding. And we talked beforehand. That is Failsafe, correct?
Yes.
Great movie about and we'll get into it later, but nuclear war Failsafe was one of the movies I watched to get inspiration for the nuclear war concepts in the game for sure.
Well, I had mentioned it before we were talking about it. I don't know, Doug hadn't joined us at that point, so maybe he's familiar with this movie. Have you ever heard of or seen the movie, I should say, Colossus: The Forbidden Project? I
have not. I have Failsafe actually on DVD. I've never heard of the other one.
Colossus: The Forbidden Project is a real interesting one. It was like 1969 or 70. And basically the US and the Soviet Union create these supercomputers and they connect them. So that way it avoids nuclear war, that we keep both sides honest until the computers decide that humans are a nuisance.
Oh.
And the AI develops. It's almost like a precursor to Terminator in a way.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
And war games.
Pretty interesting. And war games. It's a really interesting sci-fi. It's like an hour and a half or something like that. For the time, of course, the computer graphics, the computer stuff at the time, it's timely for that time period. But the concept is chilling and interesting at the same time. It's still a classic movie, I think.
Yeah, Blake just in the chat just said that looks more like Dr. Strangelove. Actually, that's what I asked. That's what I asked Mo if it was beforehand.
Well, it's a mashup of war games and Dr. Strangelove, I think. Yeah, I think you are correct. Yeah. I thought it was Failsafe when I grabbed it, but I was
Failsafe has similar scenes, though.
I do have a Failsafe one now. I'm gonna have to look because I know I have a couple of them. I have one from each. So that's my error on that one. But so let's get into Global War 1985. You've got this game now. You've said you've been in development now with this for 2 years, and first off, give everybody the thumbnail sketch on the game and what to look forward to with it.
If you want to pop out that first slide
Sure.
while we're talking, Mo, that'd be awesome. So about 2+ years ago, I pitched a game development idea to Doug, and we had a great conversation. And he said, "Hey, I've got that's a great idea, Chris, but I've got a list of games that I already want to develop." And he started going through the list and he was kind of checking through them, and he got to Global War 1985. And that got me really excited. I'm a child of the 80s. I grew up in the 80s. Star Wars was like the first movie I saw in the theater as a kid. And so I remember watching movies like, and our view of war in the 80s was heavily shaped by the media that we consumed in the 80s, especially for my generation. And so, I remember TV programs like The Day After, I remember movies like War Games, Red Dawn, certainly, Hunt for Red October later in the 80s as well. And then obviously books and like Tom Clancy's Red Storm Rising. Just really, and then as a game player in the 80s too, I first got into games through Axis and Allies, but as a history buff, I quickly moved on to other areas. And my first hex and counter game was actually a victory game, Civil War. And so I got into that. But I always kind of stuck with Axis and Allies because, my broader friend group would play that. But I always wanted a game like that, but set in the 80s with the global scale and the threat of global thermonuclear war. So long story short, I jumped at the chance to design that game for Doug. And Doug, you have a vision of games, of global war games. And, obviously you've got the very successful Global War 36, which you've made available now. You've also just released Global War 2025 Meltdown. And so, and Doug, maybe you could say a few words about that, but this definitely fits into Doug's vision for the Global War series, and it's just got a lot of 80s flavor.
Right. Again, Chris has taken over this the 1985, and these games are massive. Like we've been working on the Global War 1914 game for over 3 years, and they're very expensive. Excuse me, very expensive to produce. And a long time, Chris is always like, I need some of these. I need more of these. I'm constantly sitting over, and I'm even to the point like, you do realize I'm not making any money off these games for 2-3 years, and I have all these games going. But we're going all the way back to 1805. We've got a team working on that, and not just a Napoleonic, in Europe. It's a global game. And you're like, well, what can happen globally in these other games? Well, that's what makes it interesting. That's what we've had conversations back and forth on 85. We got to make things happen in South America and make things happen in the Pacific and, all over the place, not just in Europe, because there's hundreds and hundreds of games of global war that takes place in Europe. Yeah. Right. It's been done over and over and over. So the global, I wanted a global game, and we're developing the 2025 Meltdown. I envision it as a beer and pretzel game with Will. Actually, it was a big game like this, and we've reduced it down to a beer and pretzel game so it could be played in 4 to 6 hours. But we are now currently working on 2025, a global game, large scale. So, 1936 is our bread and butter right now. Version 4 will be out this year, and we've got a lot of other things going. Global War 1965 is one that's being developed. So, that's the vision that we have at Historical Board Gaming.
And Mo, for 36, there are no less than 3 YouTube wars being played of Global War 36 as we speak.
YouTube wars. These are guys who have the game set up in their war room or their game room, and they're taking their turn filming it, putting it on YouTube, and then other players are taking their turn. Because there's very little, if no, hidden information in these games. It's possible to do that, and that's awesome. Yeah, there's one called Operation Crimson Tide, also a little bit 80s. Early 90s inspired there. There's one called Operation Goldeneye. There's one called Operation Torchlight. Oh, wow.
All 3 going on right now. And so for this particular game, this is the prototype that you're seeing in this picture. And not only that, but it's like a third of the map. And what we've discovered through testing, and we've gone through extremely rigorous testing on this, and a great group of playtesters. And what we found was we just weren't testing fast enough to release this game before the playtest team was going to retire, right? So we had to find a way to more quickly test the game. And so we broke it down into smaller pieces. And this is basically War in the Pacific Theater. And what we discovered is not only could we get better feedback on the concepts themselves, but we also basically created new scenarios, smaller scenarios that could be played when we shipped the game. So that picture you were showing was what we're calling scenario 1, which is the Pacific Typhoon scenario, which is a 3-player scenario between China, the Soviet Far East Command, and the U.S. Pacific Command. And so it is all about Sino, Soviet tension, and that's, those two are going to duke it out with each other, because one of the things that you quickly learn when you get into the 80s is that the Chinese and the Soviets were no longer friends by the 80s, and the China was starting to embrace the West. And I've got a slide where we can get into a little bit about that later, but this is a 3-player game, and it's a prototype. This was the setup before we play tested in December. And the second thing I'd like to point out is, like, we've talked a lot about this game in terms of how we want you to feel when you play this game, and pretty much everybody, the three of us lived through the 80s, and most of the playtest team lived through the 80s. We want you to get that 80s feeling when you play this game. So even the words there at the bottom, are that, shall we play a game? That's what Matthew Broderick faced when he sat down at that computer terminal in the movie War Games. We want you to have that feeling of, how is World War III going to start in 1985? And what's that going to do to global friction? And where's the tinderbox going to be that starts World War III? Because the three of us know, and the listeners know, it didn't actually happen, and thank God it didn't. But it would have just taken a little bit of a spark someplace in a hot spot like Angola, like Nicaragua, perhaps the Philippines, someplace like that, to get tension levels aggravated to the point where, somebody throws a punch, somebody else throws a little bit harder punch. The next thing you know, the Warsaw Pact Alliance tanks are rolling into West Germany. And so that's kind of that. We've definitely taken inspiration from that. And then last thing I'll say just on the design is, I'm a big fan of Rocky IV, and you'll definitely see a lot of that in this game. I mean, you will feel in this game, like, if you're the NATO alliance, you're Rocky Balboa, and if you're Warsaw Pact Alliance, you're Ivan Drago.
Nice.
And the Soviets are going to try to bully people across the globe and get away with it. And the NATO alliance is going to be Rocky Balboa trying to be the underdog and punching back. And so that's really the feeling we're trying to evoke. Meanwhile, China in the global game is kind of sitting there saying, well, if we can survive the Soviet assault across our frontier, maybe we can emerge as the new global superpower. And so they have objectives and victory conditions that fit that as well. So that's kind of how we were taking the approach to this game from a design standpoint.
Yeah, the bear and the eagle will fight and the dragon will rise, that sort of thing. That and I remember specifically reading Red Storm Rising on a tank in Korea at the time, in downtime. So it was kind of trippy to read this going, wow, this is like pretty much could be happening right now, the way he wrote that book. And it was it was neat, and at the same time it's a little humbling to read it and go, wow, this really could kick off at any moment. And it wasn't until several years later, when the fall of the Soviet Union happened, that threat was not the threat, and then things changed into the way we are now.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point, Mo. And in the 80s, especially in the mid 80s, and Doug was really smart to set this game in 85, which he did before I even got on the project, because that's really kind of an inflection point. I mean, you were in the military, in the 80s, is my understanding, or the 90s, and
80s.
And so like the Reagan buildup was real. 600 ship Navy, Trident II missile, a lot more investment, B-1B bomber back on the table, etc. And 85 was kind of the inflection point where a lot of these systems were starting to come into formations, into more divisions. AH-64 was just coming into some helicopter support divisions at that time as well. And so that was kind of the inflection point where, if you set a game in the early 80s and it's historical, like all of Doug's games are, it's really the Soviets are really gonna have more of an advantage. And if you set it in the late 80s, the U.S. is really going to have more of an advantage, only not having the Trident II, which didn't come in, I think, until the early 90s. So, but the U.S. still had an imbalance in their nuclear forces in 1985, and so we've modeled that into the game as well. And of course, the U.S. can do something about that if they want to, because we've got things like SDI in the game, we've got advanced sub-launch ballistic missiles in the game, which represent the Trident II. And so while the Soviets are trying to kind of take their last chance at winning a conventional war, the U.S. can race to get some of these technologies, which will tip the balance in their favor, and again, help them throw some of those Rocky Balboa punches back at the Soviets.
Nice. I like that. Now, Doug, all this work he's got you doing, where are these miniatures coming from? Are you guys printing these yourself, or are these sourced from elsewhere, or what? Because I know he keeps asking for more. You keep sending him more, and it's driving you guys crazy. But look at it. Look at the beauty on the table there.
Yeah, and part of that is development. It does come from HPG. We have some in-house 3D printers, and I have modelers that I use. I was a computer draftsman for 31 years, so I used to do 3D modeling. Of course, I modeled refineries and things like that, but I had time during my lunch hour to do stuff. I don't have time now, so I have to hire it out. But yeah, he needs something. I just sent him a bag of stuff a couple of weeks ago. He was needing for some expansions things. But part of it, is like, hey, these helicopter blades are breaking. We've had them for a year, and we noticed like 6 of the X amount breaking. So we'll go back to the modeler and strengthen them or do this, do that. Because over development, we want to know this stuff. So when we actually produce it, we have good miniatures that are going to work, and always come up with, new ideas, markers, just different things. So yeah, it's Chris, I'm usually pretty hands-on on the design of the games, a lot more than I am with Chris. Chris has done such a good job. He's so organized that I've not really had to do too much. Every now and then I come in and throw a monkey wrench and he gets a little upset with me, but every one of my designers gets upset with me when I change things. Like, I've been doing this for a year. Where were you back then? But sorry.
Yeah. Well, talk
the
about that.
Made it hard. I mean,
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, Doug and I probably would have gotten together a lot more than we have if it hadn't been for the pandemic. But sorry, Mo, I didn't mean it.
No. I was going to say, talk about that. How that makes your job as a publisher easier when you have a designer like Chris who just takes the bull by the horns, runs with it, and is very organized, but at the same time can drive you crazy when he keeps saying, "Hey, I need this now and I need that now." I mean, talk about that. From your perspective as a publisher.
Yeah, well, I'm a small business, and sometimes I've got all these designers. I've got about 14 or 15 guys that are all working on games and things, and I'm always trying to send them things and develop new ideas and markers. But when I've got all these guys pulling for resources, I'm thinking I've only got so much cash flow coming in, and 3D printing, you got to buy resin, and I've got a couple guys that actually run my 3D printers now, but it gets expensive, and every time they need a map ran or the artist needs to change things. Luckily, again, Chris has modified all of his maps. A lot of my designers don't have that ability, so they'll make markups and things, and I send it to my artists. And of course, they don't do anything for free, so you got to pay. So it's been a great help there. And some of my other designers make jokes like, "Oh, Chris is your favorite because he does all this stuff." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, he's my favorite," But it's all the guys get along. They, I tell my designers, if you got a question, you're stuck on something, reach out. We've got a WhatsApp that all of them are on. Ask a question, get some feedback, and then go on. But I don't want 15 designers working with Chris all at one time, because nothing will ever get done. They'll just back forth. But, be smart enough to realize I'm at an impasse. I'm going to use some of my resources, or call me. I'll make a decision, right or wrong. I'll make it, and let's move on.
Yeah.
So.
Mo, I've learned, first of all, somebody asked for an A10.
Oh,
there it is. Sorry, I'm going to put it back in Saudi. It's defending against Soviet incursions into the Middle East right now.
I just love the A10. I think everybody does. They're not as sleek, sexy as like the F-16 or something like that, but they're just sexy because they just come in and burn. It's just great. I love those.
Yes, they do have some armor busting ability in the game as well. So we've tried to model that, into the game. Doug's also got those available on the website now. In his 3D printed section, which he's adding more and more of the pieces that you need for 85 onto there. So if you can't wait, you can go pick them up now. I want to say something about design too, because just to piggyback onto what Doug said, my approach to this, and this, it was kind of throw everything in and then see what sticks in testing, and, earlier versions of the game had way more in it, and so we've streamlined it dramatically during testing as well, almost to the point where, now we're getting to the point where my list for Doug isn't very long anymore. of things that I need. It's definitely grown shorter through the testing process. And, with Doug being so stretched and having so many games in development, I definitely try to prioritize what I need from him to get this game done, because we are intending to release this game this fall. And so that's our goal. And so we're trying to get testing done. We've got a pretty firm quarterly schedule now that we're going to try to stick to get this game out. And obviously there's a ton of variables that are going to come into effect that might have out of our control, but that's our intention.
Well, here's the thing that will tie into Doug as well. When it comes to your plan to get it out by, third, fourth quarter this year, with the global situation now the way it is with sourcing materials and stuff, is that going to have any impact on what you're doing, or do you do a lot of the printing here in the States? I know you do the 3D printing yourself, but how is that going to affect you, the global shortage situation and shipping situation that we're all facing? How is that going to impact the business?
Well, it's been impacting a lot. We've been, looking at different sources within this, within the States. But the problem we've run into is, like I'm trying to pull stuff. A lot of, I've got almost 20 molds sitting in China that we do all our plastic injection over the years that I've been in business, all sitting in China. Well, apparently they're locked down pretty tight. There's some parts of China that are going just fine, but there's other parts that are not doing anything. And my guy who I'm using, he's not producing right now. And it's been very frustrating for my plastic injection. So I'm looking for other sources. So we said, well, we can 3D print. When we did 2025, we actually 3D printed the whole faction of the Caliphate, because we only did 2 molds, did one in 3 colors, the other one in 2 colors. I said, hey, it'd be really neat to do the Caliphate, because we can model those and have their own pieces. And they're going to be black, and we can do, we don't have to paint them or anything. We'll just 3D print them in black. Well, it was cool, but we're still a small company, man. We're trying to produce these black pieces as fast as we can. And we just don't, we don't have industrial printers to really spit them out. And all 3D printers are made in China. All the resin's made in China. All the acrylic markers that we get, all that acrylic comes from China. It's frustrating. We're kind of, we're in a box. We kind of did this to ourselves. Everything comes from China. So even though I'm trying to pull stuff to the US and I've been looking for sources, I thought I had a source for 3D printing, but just like anything else, cost is prohibitive, just because, molds, if you do plastic injection in the States, molds are like 10 times the expense that I'm paying in China. And it's not like I'm trying to really make a ton of money because I'm going to do everything in China. No, that's the only way I can sell them at a decent price. If not, these 65-cent pieces that, they were buying, they're going to be like GHQ little metal ones.
Yeah.
Be $2, $3 a piece, and it's just so expensive now. So we are, when I did 2025, we did boxes this time, and they were done in the States. All my printing, card stock was all done in the States. We 3D printed. We did all the 3D printing here, but again, everything comes from China. So it's frustrating, trying to find sources to kind of change things. It's not going to happen overnight. Hopefully there's more businesses to say, hey, you know what? I need to start producing stuff here in the States and making their own for this stuff. And it's going to be a while. So we'll just keep plugging along the best we can.
Yeah, that's one of the unfortunate situations of, putting all the eggs in one basket, relying on China like that, because you get the inexpensive materials, because everything's cheaper when it's produced over there. However, if there is an issue getting from there, which there hasn't been up until now, but now there is, we realize, wow, it would have been better to keep it within our own borders, but that's a discussion for another place and another time. But it does impact the game, and hopefully it won't impact the game too much, because we don't want to see any businesses being impacted too heavily by it, even though they all are. So we did have a comment about Rambo mode. Is there going to be a Rambo mode? I don't think so.
No, but you did just give me an idea. So
Doug's like, oh no, another idea. What's this going to cost me?
Exactly.
I just can't decide whether the idea should be in Vietnam or Afghanistan or both.
As long as he doesn't drive a tank and shoot it at the same time, please don't do that.
I do watch Rambo. That's right. I do watch Rambo quite a bit while I'm doing design work or solo testing down here, I have to say.
Well, the newer Rambos I've actually liked a lot more than the others, although the first one is still the best because the first one is the plausible one of all of them. The others just got more and more ridiculous as they went along, but they were still enjoyable. And then you've got the older. I don't have any more patience for anybody Rambo that just goes right to work. And it was interesting in the newer movies, you know, he's that get off my lawn guy.
I really like the first two. The third one was okay.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I actually really liked the fourth one quite a bit, and I thought the latest one was pretty weak.
It was the other one though, where he was. Well, where was he? Was he
Myanmar?
Myanmar. That's it. Where he's just you know, hey, he's doing his own thing. Then he has to go get those missionaries. I was just like, wow, let's just escalate the hyper violence. Why don't we? I like it.
Oh yeah, when he's on the 50 cal and throwing those guys down in the trees
and liquefies that guy who's in the front seat. Right. I was just like, okay, I like this. This is definitely my type of movie.
Yes.
It was fun. But so now we did discuss something. You were both talking about the whole thing about Global War 1985. At first glance, people are going to say, especially, you know, war gamers, they're going to look at it and say, this is just Axis and Allies. You know, that's their first impression. From watching your videos, I had the obvious same first impression. This is Axis and Allies. But then after watching your videos, I was like, this is Axis and Allies for grown-ups or Axis and Allies for war gamers, because there's a lot more depth here. And this is not like a 10-page rule book either, we're talking. So there's a lot more to it. And you kind of have that marriage of the big, huge hex and counter games with the Axis and Allies, you know, sentimentality to it. I think it's great what you've got going here. So talk about that a little bit, both of you.
Yeah, Doug, why don't you talk a little bit about your marriage idea first, and then I can kind of talk about how we do that in 85.
Sure. I was telling Mo before we started here, my envision, you know, I have a lot of counter games. My first counter game was the old Spy World War III game. 1977, I think I bought it. You know, I was in high school. Yeah, that dates me, doesn't it? But you know, and I always thought, you know, the detail of these things, you can do so much. You know, I've got the whole Europa series, I've got the Flames of War series, and I've got a bunch of other stuff. A lot of it I haven't played, but I have looked through, you know. So my envision when I started HBG is I was a big Axis and Allies player. Of course, before that, big Risk player, played some chit games. But I said, we really need Axis and Allies to have more stuff. So I was always doing, you know, house rules like many other people have done. But when I started HBG, I'm like, you know, you can put markers under these infantry, and then those infantry can be either a militia, or it can be a Marine, or it can be an airborne, or it can be paramilitary, you know, just place a marker on it. And we've got all these NATO markers, symbols or other ones, and you just put it underneath your infantry, and it can be anything you want it to be. And that way it's not just Axis and Allies. And same with the tank. It can be a first gen, second generation, third gen, heavy tank, light tank. All of a sudden you got more depth. And when people say Axis and Allies, what people like about Global War in 1936, it starts in 1936, so it gives you time to build, not just build your forces, but actually change, alter just a little bit. It's not, you know, there are people that want to play exactly how it went down. You know, I'm always the ones that like, hey, what if Czechoslovakia didn't give up some of their land and they actually fought and the Germans had to attack them? You know, Czechoslovakia had a pretty stinking good army, you know, like, you know, things like that. So all these what ifs. I love alternate history. Our first box game was America, which was a alternate history game. And we're doing I'm doing another one with one of my designers. But so it was always about making it more complex, but going back to 36, it's a 3-player game. So you have the Comintern, Russia, against the Allies and the Axis. So it's not just Axis and Allies. So it makes it a totally different game. And we probably would get the most comments about that in that game. It just totally changes the dynamic of the game. It's just, they love it because it's a 3-player game. And we've kind of carrying that out amongst the other games, not just one-on-one, because it does change things up.
Yeah, and just to get into look over my shoulder right here at the games I've got on my. I mean, I consider myself a war gamer who plays Doug's Global War Games as part of the war games that I play. And so and also Mo, look what just arrived an hour ago.
Nice. That's going to be awesome.
And
You're
I know Doug's got
seeing that one.
A couple copies on order too. So
Doug's a smart guy. He's got one for play, one for investment.
Exactly. He's going to fund more of my project here.
Yeah, I have to sell it.
So do I have 2 copies of Central America? I don't think so. This is 6th Fleet. So
wait a minute. What's so 6th Fleet is there's one and there's something in between it.
This is Central America. Oh, I do. Oh my God.
I was gonna say there's 2 Central Americas.
Tell my wife.
Good eye, Fred. Good eye. Because when he said that, I was like, and you said no. I was like, no, there's 2 right there. You got to go over further right.
One is the copy I bought back in the 80s and destroyed, and the other one's the one I rebought probably 2 years ago because I wanted a complete copy. So anyway, but I know I'm a war gamer, but it's going to be difficult. I'm also have a job, a family, lots of responsibilities outside the home, and I just don't have a group of friends, and I don't have the time to commit 20, 30 hours to playing a game. And even if you're going to play a theater level game of warfare in the 80s, like let's just say the Pacific Theater, like I know you're having Mark Herman on tomorrow, on one of your shows. Like let's say, Empire of the Sun, set in the 80s. I mean, that's not going to play in 8 hours, I'm assuming.
Probably not. Yeah.
But we're going to have a scenario here that, and I love those games and I play them. I'm going to play straight to hell if Doug will ever, give me time off. But anyway,
cracking the whip.
We've got a scenario. You can play theater level Pacific War among the superpowers in the 80s, and it plays in 8 to 10 hours. And so just using an area-based approach allows you to just decrease the complexity of the game, but still give you the feeling like you're making all the key strategic and even some operational decisions that you would make at a theater level like that. And then also we're going to have 2 other scenarios in the game too. We're going to have Red Thunder, which is the rest of the world, primarily Europe, but also Africa, South America, and the Middle East as well. And then we'll have the big one, which we're calling Global Thermonuclear War, where you can play the entire war if you want to. And it's actually
Global Thermonuclear War, which will be a one turn?
Well, we're taking a little license with that name, of course, but you can use nukes, and maybe we can get into nukes here pretty soon. But we wanted to provide a game that you could play, and if you want to play the Pacific, you can do it in a day. If you want to play the rest of the map, you can do it in a day. The global game's still going to take a couple of days, if not a weekend, to play, but that's consistent with Doug's other global war games that he's producing as well. So it's just at this scale and complexity, I'm just not sure Hex Encounter. I mean, it could work, right? But I think just the hexes alone would increase the complexity of the game, and that would increase the time.
It would slow movement down. That's where area movement is a lot better because you can move much. I don't want to say faster, but you can compress things, and you can add. It's easier to put more units into an area, and you have better ways of representing air control, things like that, sea control, when you do area control.
Absolutely. That shelf could use some organizing. No judgment, please. I just put that shelf up and was just throwing stuff up there. So, Doug, maybe before you come in 2 weeks, I'll get that organized. I have a shelf over here you can't see that is organized historically, like from early to late era, but I haven't gotten there yet, guys. Sorry.
Nice. And then Fred was asking which one Mark is going to be on. There's a World War III roundtable tomorrow that we're going to be doing at noon at 12 o'clock. I almost said noon o'clock at 12 Central. So you can join in on that. And yes, Carlos Colossus, the Fordman Project. I can't believe somebody else mentioned it as well. That's a classic. But I like the idea, like you're saying, of the marriage of the two, because you're simplifying the giant snacks, which you would have if you were going to be playing a hex encounter game. You're simplifying movement by grouping it into areas, and you're still having the complexity though and the richness of the story when you have those hexes or the giant stacks in those hexes, but you don't have to worry about knocking anything over. You don't need to worry about, oh yeah, okay, we played one turn and we moved one hex. You know, when you're fighting in an area, it gives you a bigger scope, a bigger feel. And yeah, if you're still sitting there after a couple turns, it feels like you're having a really big, long fight. And that I think it adds to it. That's why scale is real important, whether you go hex or you go area control. And in this instance, I think area control is really good. Plus, it's also great for using the miniatures.
Plus, Mo, if this game's successful, you know, and people like it and they want more and they like the system, you know, it's certainly possible, you know, to go further than that and drill in. You know, in certain areas, you could drill in on Europe and the North Atlantic. You could drill in on the Middle East and do, you know, Iraq War I or something like that. You know, so, you know, you always know that if you do something like this, it's successful, people like it, they want more. You can go further then, and then you can dial up the complexity at that point. But if nobody gets the game and buys it because it's too big, it's too complex, then and you don't take those first steps, then you're going nowhere.
No, it's very true. And, you know, that's the other thing, too, is when you're dealing with a game like this, how do you get the word out? What are the challenges you guys facing as far as getting out the word? I know you've got your YouTube channel. You show a lot of the playtests on to try to build up attention. Doug, I know that you have the website and you try to get stuff out through your newsletter and through your website or your YouTube channel as well. What other avenues of getting the word out about this game are you guys using, and what challenges are you facing there?
Yep. Well, the biggest thing, I do have several people and several designers that have their own YouTube channel, like Chris and several others, Hilltop Pillbox, and I can't even think of all of them.
Panzer King, General Hand Grenade.
Yeah, and so they promote things out too, and they've got an audience as well. You know, like you said, we have a newsletter that gets out. So some people read the newsletter. Sometimes it goes to spam, depending on the filters. You know, YouTube, Facebook, we do what we can. But there are people that when they see this, Mo, and you hit it, you know, right off, people think, oh, it's Axis and Allies. And it's not. So it is, some of it is just they see the visual and that's all they're looking at and they move on. Mm-hmm. Just like people who are into plastic miniatures see a chit game and like, and they move on.
Eyes glaze over like, that's too much.
There are a lot of great chit games out there, you know.
Yeah.
I would say counter. So that's, you know, like I said, we are a small company. I do a lot of the website things myself, a lot of the design, a lot of the, a lot of everything myself. That's why I'm up here a lot. You know, I telling Chris, I'm up here at 6 a.m. I start my day at 6. I get up at 5. When I work out, I started working out after the New Year, my New Year's resolution. So I'm getting up at 4 Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I'm here to 4 in the afternoon. So I work 11-hour days usually, and then usually half day on weekends. In the evening when I'm sitting there watching TV with the wife, I'm usually on my phone researching like, Chris is needing more stuff. It's not just Chris, but you know, but I do a lot of research in my chair. I've got some things next to me. So, and you know, there's emails, there's texts, there's messages, you know, there's not just one way of communicating anymore. Now there's like a dozen. I'm trying to go, you know, like, and then, so, but yeah, it's hard to, it's hard to get the word out with us. I tried to get a social media person at one time, and actually a couple times that didn't work out. So, yeah, you know, so I could get, you know, a broader audience.
Yeah. Building the presence is one of the hardest things to do. And like you said, one of the challenges you'll face is, people will look and they'll just assume they see the miniatures like Axis and Allies, just like an Axis and Allies guy is going to, you know, say, oh, Hex Encounter, it's too boring, too much. I don't want to do it. Stop assuming and do some research. At least check it out and see. I mean, me personally, I see miniatures. I'm like, oh, cool. You know, and then I'll look at a game and say, yeah, it's cool to look at, but the game itself is paper thin or whatever, because it really is and you see that a lot on Kickstarter. The game is really a vehicle to have somebody pay for them to develop miniatures for their Euros or whatever. And you'll see that a lot of times, and that kind of can sour some people. But then if you look, like with this one, Global War 85, when I was watching the videos that you were doing as Admiral Seabass, I was just like, wow, this is pretty cool. That's what drew me into it. And I've been trying to get the word out and try to help get that attention up for this. And hopefully you guys, I don't know if you're aware, but we're supposed to have another convention down here. I think I might've mentioned it to you in May in Dallas. So hopefully you guys can come down if you get the opportunity, because that would be a great way to have a couple of the smaller scenarios that you could play so you can show the game off.
Yeah, we'll have to look into that for sure.
What's the name of the convention?
CSW Dallas. John Kranz does the Constant World in Tempe. He's going to be doing one in Dallas again. We did it a couple of years ago, but we did it for the first time. And then a week later, the world shut down. So it was just, timing was bad. And then last year, obviously it didn't happen, but spinning it back up again this year, which is going to be great.
You're only 4.5 hours away, Dallas from Tulsa. So
yeah, not a bad deal.
Yeah, Mo. Hey, Mo, one thing you and your listeners should know is there's other guys like me on Doug's design team. I'm not the only war gamer that he's got designing these games for him. He's got a guy who co-designed America and also designed a game he released last year called Midway. Guy's named Mike Kelly, and he's a big war gamer. I mean, he's got a massive, I think 3 or 4 map Normandy game set up right now and playing. I think it's the one from GMT. And so, I mean, there are a lot of us who are war gamers who design for Doug, and we sort of live in between these worlds, so to speak.
Well, the America is one that I have been curious about. Now I'm over on the website now looking because I want to see if I can find the game, because I was like, that reminds me, I need to get a copy of that game because it always seemed cool, the alternate history, and I just love the whole idea of it, and having a chance to play something like that is a great way to just experience different things, and it kind of reminds me of the old Fortress America, that style game. It's got that same type of vibe, but obviously alternate history there.
I'll send you a copy, Mo.
Okay, cool. That'd be great. I appreciate that, and we'll get information on that on the channel about that, because I think it's really cool to make sure that we get attention to these games, because a lot of times it goes back to what we were just talking about. People will look at them and say, miniature's not going to be fun. Give them a chance. I mean, because we all played those games at one point or another. And like you said, you're all war gamers, and you're bringing that those war game sensibilities into these, and that perfect marriage is forming. And it's great to see.
Mo, if we want to click into some of the pictures, like picture 2, we can tease that. I mean, not tease that out, but we can talk more about that. Like if you click on the next picture, after this one. This one is thanks for your service, Mo. Mo, you served in the U.S. Marines, and we do represent in the opening setup, the Marine forces in Okinawa. You can even see the little blue thing there on the base, representing that the U.S. controls that base, and obviously you got the Marine Division there, and the AV-8B and the Tarawa class LHA there, ready to support freedom around the world. So thank you, Mo. That one's just for you.
Nice, I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, and then so you can see we got the global hotspots modeled. Again, global war never happened in the 80s, so we've got to draw that thread from peace to war. And how does it happen? So this is a recent playtest where, Angola goes hot, and Soviets start moving troops into Angola to support Angola making a push. And as you know, Angola was pretty hot from the early to mid 70s through the mid to late 80s. And so anyway, in this playtest, the U.S. got a task force and a group of Marines in their Marine Division, including a main battle tank and some AH-1 attack helicopter assets in there to save South Africa's bacon just in time. And if you look at the top right, the Warsaw Pact had moved troops into Mozambique as well to try to do some type of pincer move on the South Africans. And because East Germans had a lot of forces stationed in Mozambique at the time. The Soviets moved in some close air support fighters there. You can see the Su-25 Frogfoot sculpt that's also Doug has available now. And So you can see the U.S. Move stuff in just in time, and you can see in the game when we play it, it just starts to spiral out of control. And the bellicosity of the U.S. and NATO, and to a certain extent China, just increases as the Soviets and the Warsaw Pact agitate in these hotspots. And so there's just one example for you.
That's really cool. And now this would kind of tie into something you were talking about earlier, where you were saying about you can possibly drill down into these scenarios a little further later on if you were to expand on it. So something like Angola would be a good example. You can maybe make a bigger scenario of that smaller area, so you can concentrate just on something here that in the overall game would be abstracted a little bit more than if you were to drill down and make a more detailed, fight
Absolutely.
in that area.
As you know, there are war games on this. Set in the 70s and 80s.
One of the best war games there is. One of the best, especially multiplayer games, is Angola.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll go to the next one.
If you go to the next one, another one here is Iran. Sacred Oil just came out, and I can't wait to dig into that. But in this game, Iran's 4 spaces. But you can see here once again, the Soviets have invaded Iran, going for the oil resources. And one of the strategic objectives of the U.S. in the game is to protect the access of the Middle Eastern oil to the world markets. The Soviets are coming in here with multi-role fighters, air cav units, and cruise missiles fired from a Tu-95, by the way. And the U.S. has a carrier group in the Persian Gulf, and they've scrambled in Maverick and Goose there in the F-14, along with close air support in the form of the A-7s. They're literally flying over the Iranians, trying to protect that oil territory.
Nice.
And so and in the meantime, Iraq's kind of standing there. What are we going to do? And the Soviets have a way they can influence Iraq to try to join the war. But that can be negatively influenced by how much the U.S. gets in the region as well. So anyway, we do, again, try to model that strategically. I know Fabrizio, in Thin Red Line Games has done this at a really drilled in level, but we do have that ability to do these hotspots in the game as well.
Well, I think I kind of like Michael's idea over here when it comes back to going back to Angola for a second here. He says Mozambique. I kind of like that. So
Mozambique, that's really good.
And then Warsaw Pact Mozambique was blocked by Bob Dylan. Deep cut.
There you go.
And then Goler's saying, I'm new to painting parts. Is there a second coat of gloss or something that makes it shine, or is it special paint? I was thinking you're probably using like a gloss paint.
Or is it that you're using a gloss paint on the Soviet dark brown there. So then everything else, like I use a flat camo paint from Krylon for the US. And so I'll just put a gloss clear coat over those just to match the gloss finish of the Soviets.
Is there any, just as a side here before we go to the next slide here, as somebody who paints miniatures as well, is there any special preparation you need to do with these miniatures? You're saying they're resin 3D printed. Is there any special preparation, like how you, aside from the regular washing, things like that?
So everybody's going to have different approach to this, right? Doug just recommends washing them, before you paint them. I've never used a base coat or had to on the 3D printed pieces like you do on the metal pieces. But no, if you just wash them, make sure they're clean, they paint up super quick.
Okay, cool.
And honestly, for this is a prototype, so we've emphasized speed and testing over,
making it all pretty.
And so I know there are a lot of people who will get this game and do a much better job than I have at tricking these out.
They're going to sit down and literally paint every model, which is going to be beautiful to see on the table. I'll say that.
Correct.
So we'll go back to the pictures. The next one.
So then you can see here the naval, or the I think the war game influence here, but this is an example of naval combat right off of Somali here. And so in the game, we've modeled not just the oil in the Middle East, but the ability for the NATO alliance to get that oil to their markets. And so right underneath that blast marker there is an oil tanker that supports the NATO economy. And if the Soviets can get at that, that will reduce NATO income. And so they moved a sub and a destroyer in there to take that tanker out. And now the U.S. is responding. And you can see they're responding with, attack bombers from a carrier air group in the Persian Gulf. two nuclear attack subs, one which is going in to do the job in close, and the other one fired an anti-ship missile from one zone away to try to take out the Soviet destroyer. So this gives me the feel of like the Hunt for Red October game that TSR put out in the late 80s. And we definitely wanted to model that in the game as well. So it's and then also there's a U.S. destroyer in there too. And why are they yellow? Because a lot of guys who play Doug's games it's called tipping their ships. Just so you can identify, because the sculpts are all different. That's a Udaloy class destroyer for the Soviets and Spruance for the U.S., but the yellow tipping indicates they're both destroyers in the game.
Yeah, it makes it a lot easier at a glance because, especially when you have something all over the table now, not everyone is going to geek out and know all of the different platforms by name and the different versions of them. They're just going to go, my plane, my ship. That's literally all they're going to care. So Correct. Like the tipping will tell you whether it's destroyer or not. So that at a glance makes it a lot easier for recognition.
Absolutely. This goes back to the feel of the game. We've tried to model the strategic importance of the GI-UK gap, which was a key strategic barrier for the NATO alliance in keeping Soviet subs, especially out of the sea lift lanes for the reinforcement of Europe. And so, Iceland, and also if you remember your Tom Clancy, Operation Polar Glory, the Soviets saw strategic importance of Iceland there. And in that case, it was providing air cover for their backfires that were going after the sea lift as well. Mm-hmm. And so you see and again, this is a prototype. So those microphone looking things there represent the SOSUS surveillance system. And that ASW helicopter is on ASW patrol. So any Soviet sub that moves through there, it gets to take a shot at. It gets to pair up with that microphone and take a shot at a sub moving through there. Otherwise, you got to have a destroyer, or if you have advanced sonar tech, you got to have a frigate to go after subs with air power.
Nice.
Yep.
I like that you modeled SOSUS there. I mean, that's obviously what the GI-UK was there, but you have to make sure that people understand how tough that was for the Soviets to get through, and how tough it was for NATO to defend as well, and that cat and mouse game that was constantly going on there, and how critical that gap is.
And even the Soviets sending subs through there early in the game can increase the DEFCON level of the NATO alliance itself and the alert level, because if they start flooding subs through there at a rate above their usual patrols, you're going to know something's up.
Well, yeah. Then the East Coast is going to get a little nervous.
Exactly. So if you look at the next slide, here we go. Carlos Vasquez, this is for you. This is literal Operation Polar Glory in effect in our current playtest. And the Soviets did manage to come in there and take Iceland. And now those backfires are sitting there at that airbase in Iceland, and a lot of subs there in the North Atlantic as well, ready to block U.S. sea lift. So anyway, that you can see that, again, we're trying to recreate this feel for you of all this good 80s media that we've all consumed about this hypothetical war in the past.
Yeah, just looking at that picture is just like, that is just awesome. Now obviously thankfully it never happened, but still it's something that we envision, and all those movies in the 80s, the books and things, and we envision it in our heads from reading those books. So it's great to see it in a board game so we can actually see it all play out while we're playing.
And then you can see here, like, okay, what's the U.S. going to do about this? And hunting subs, and you can see here, off of Portugal. So the U.S. is like, well, we're probably not going to be able to break through to France, so let's take the southern route, and we don't want our stuff sitting in the water too long because of those backfires. So Portugal looks good, so they're going to have to take out this Soviet sub off of Portugal. So the frigate's pinning the sub down, and U.S. And in the game, we can't model every single unit in the game. And so that F-18 is modeling the P-3s and the S-3s that are pairing with ASW surface assets to go hunt down Soviet subs. And then down there off of the Canaries, you have a U.S. destroyer and a nuclear attack sub also hunting a diesel electric boat. And so anyway, that just shows you the importance of hunting down the subs and how we do that in the game.
And Fred's saying, just as long as we can have the Warthogs attacking the Kiev, thank you for flying Warthog Air.
Bert.
Right.
And then here, the U.S. was successful in this case and was able to move their sea lift through and got some boots on the ground in Europe on turn 8 in this game, and it's a 14-turn game. So You can see there we got the next gen attack helicopter, the AH-64, and managed to get some anti-air and mechanized infantry, and very importantly, artillery assets on the ground into Portugal. And the reason that's important is because when NATO does go tactical nukes in this game, artillery boosts their power significantly against the Warsaw Pact ground forces.
That's kind of funny. Carlos saying absolutely till we need those disguised roll-on, roll-offs ferries. I'm surprised that anybody's even mentioned the Ro-Ros, because that's something that gets kind of just completely ignored.
Yeah, I'm not even sure I know what a Ro-Ro is, Mo. You're going to have to educate me.
It's basically just like he's saying here, you get the roll-on, roll-off ferries. If you're going to just roll tanks, vehicles, things like that, get them, ferry them across and roll them right off. So it's just a quick way of getting troops to a location that you need.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, it'd be better for the U.S. if they could have that stuff more off of the U.K. or France. And we've modeled Sea Lift in a way that, we want to make the backfire bomber the terrifying threat that everybody thought it was in the 80s. And it might have been in certain circumstances. And so we want to make U.S. Sea Lift to Europe either sit in the water for a turn and let the Soviets try to attack it, or we want to force the U.S. player to take a longer route to get the stuff into Central Europe and into that battleground.
Hey, look at this. Surgical strikes in Mozambique.
Yep. So you can see here, we do have space in the game. Space started out much more detailed and complicated, and we've stripped it down dramatically for the game. And so you can see here a U.S. Attack bomber from a carrier air group using a spy satellite. And we're tweaking this, so I'm not going to tell you exactly how it works. But I will say the Warsaw Pact not having any anti-air assets there means they can't shoot back. So
that's not
they're
good.
getting a free shot, and they're getting an enhanced free shot because of the use of the spy satellite.
Well, that's the benefit of it. And that's why it was so critical to have that. Just like now with ISR overhead, we have the advantage in a lot of ways over in the global war on terror, because we can see movements of these guys everywhere, and we can direct smaller teams in a more surgical fashion. And it was kind of similar here, but you're talking on a much broader scope.
Absolutely. And we have similar space assets. We simulate the Soviet Rorsats and the U.S. ocean surveillance sats also for surface for anti-ship missile attacks as well.
Nice.
This
now
was
we're in the Pacific.
Yeah, this was from a playtest in the Pacific, and this just shows you everything that can go on. This was a great playtest where we had a random event where the Soviets took control in Indonesia, and then invaded the Philippines and took it over. So the U.S. is trying to fight back here to the extent that it can. Yeah, and so you can see the buff over there, the B-52. You can see U.S. airborne forces. You can see U.S. air cav. And attack helicopter forces, a lot of missiles flying all over the place.
That's a lot of stuff right there. Oh, a lot more stuff here.
And here's China. I told you earlier we talk a little bit more about China, but Global War 85 is a 2 to 7 player game, and if you're playing the global game, it's a 3-player game. And China can be the spoiler. China was in a period of transition in the 80s. They were embracing the West, moving rapidly away from the Soviets. And they were just making the decision to become a more modern economy that engaged in trade with places like South Korea, Japan, and the U.S. They didn't have the modernized force that even the Soviets had or the Americans had. But they are fun to play, and they do have cheaper infantry in the game and infantry-style units to represent and model their efficient, not only manpower advantage mode, but their efficiency in equipping their infantry divisions. They had some very peculiar and unique things that they would do to outfit their infantry divisions. And so we model that in the game by giving them more access to cheaper infantry. So there's the China setup in a recent playtest.
Very nice.
All smiles before the nuking begins. These are our playtesters at a playtest over the summer. Great group of guys. I got to give a shout out to 2 guys in particular. One of them is mentioned here or pictured here. The guy on the far right, Brian Smith. He's actually been in the chat. He lives close here to me, and he's been a great support in the design and the testing of this game. And so shout out to him. Also shout out to a guy not pictured here, Steve. Steve is an old friend of mine, and he was very instrumental in the early part of the testing and the design of this game as well. But great group of testers that we've had for the game.
I like it. And they got their national symbols there that they're playing the Soviets.
Yes,
Chinese,
those are coasters that Doug made. Those are actually coasters. So,
oh wow, nice.
Yeah, you can either put your adult beverage or your coffee on them, or you can in global war games, typically you put your unit purchases on there after you buy them. So,
oh, those are cool. Now, those are also going to be part of the game, or is it going to be an add-on that you can buy?
I assume, Doug, those will be add-ons.
Probably an add-on.
Yep.
Outstanding. Kind of like this right here, where you got the NATO Army set up.
Yeah, this is a NATO Army group in Central Europe, and so I'm testing on a 3x. We'll provide probably a couple of different map options, a 3x6 and a 4x8. So when you're on a 4x8, the territories, especially in Central Europe, can get pretty tight. So this is a NATO Army and a couple of air assets. You see the F4 there, which the West Germans use heavily. You can see the F104s, which a lot of the NATO countries still used in a variety of roles, even ground attack roles in the 80s. You can see the Leopard 2s, you can see the M109s, the Bradleys, the Patriots, and one single U.S. airlifted guy in there, Moe, to stop the Soviet aggression in Central Europe. But, this just lets you know, okay, this stuff's in, Rhineland, or this stuff's in northern Germany.
Sure. It's just like anything else. You have the overflow areas, and hex and counter games, you can use this sort of thing as well. So that way you can have those congested areas not be too overwhelmed and you lose track of, I think this guy was here. No, he's over here. And then you get all messed up. Absolutely. A question now on the chips here. I see you've got the bingo chips underneath for force strength. Have you guys thought about or looked at maybe tipping those as well, where you put some piping on the side of it where to say, like for the second one, there's 2 marks on it to show it's 2 strength or 3 strength, so on and so forth, graduated up to make it a little easier? Or would that be just more difficult as far as managing the chips?
I've never seen tipping to indicate quantities, but I have seen tipping to indicate like this is a medium armor in Global War 36 and this is a heavy armor, because or this is a Panzer Grenadier and this is a regular advanced or mechanized infantry for Germany in Global War 36. But the chips, they do just denote quantity,
maybe different colors, for every 5, like if you had a 5 strength, say, I don't know how high these strengths go, but like say 3 or 5, whatever it seems to be, like the high end, you can make that a different color, so that way
not a bad idea.
Instead of having 3 or 4 chips, you have 1 different color chip. This denotes 5 strength. So for every 5, you've got so if you got 2 blacks there, you're like, oh wow, that's 10 strength. That's going to be, at a glance, you don't have to sit down and count them, because it's like hexes or counters, I should say, in a hex. When you have a big stack of counters in a hex, you're like, oh, I got to count these. Oh crap, I just knocked them all over the place. And if you can avoid that just by looking at the colors, it would make it, I think, at a glance a lot faster, because there's so much going on this table that you want to be able to take in that data as fast as possible without disturbing too much. So
cool. Mo, are you talking strength or quantity?
Quantity or strength, whichever, however it's
most people do the quantity. They'll use a red chip for 5, chip for 10. I think I stock 12 or 15 different colors.
Okay.
I think Axis and Allies even had a standard of 3 colors, 2 at the beginning: gray and red, or white and red. So that's pretty common. But the strength, again, you're kind of doing the marriage with counter games. You could do that, just like the counters have the strengths on there. We have not gone into that, other than the information is on usually a reference sheet. It's attack and defense value. But you could do that. I mean, there is, I guess, a way to possibility.
Yeah. I was just thinking, because again, that, like we said, the marriage of the two, and at a glance making it easy, and being that, at least to the best of my knowledge, all this is open information, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that would make that would also let the opponent know, instead of saying how many you got over there and then looking at your stuff, they can just at a glance see it themselves. So it helps the game move faster, I think, each time. So go to the next one.
And there's a task force in the Indian Ocean. And again, Maverick and Goose with the Top Gun counter, which makes that a slightly better air superiority fighter than normal. So you got the USS Enterprise there, which Doug 3D printed. They can hold 3 aircraft, so they've got a full diverse set there of air superiority fighter, an attack fighter, and an attack bomber. And of course, you got the A7 representing the close air support. And they were just rolling out. They were starting to roll out of naval aviation at this point in time, starting to be replaced by the F-18 in certain roles, and even the A-6. And the A-6 representing more of the Navy's interdictor / light bomber / nuclear capable aircraft in the 80s. And then, you got a destroyer, a frigate, landing helicopter dock, and a nuclear attack sub there as well. It's just sitting off Diego waiting for trouble to start.
I just want to know how much Maverick and Goose are getting paid. They're everywhere. They're in the Pacific. Now they're over in the Indian Ocean. Those guys are all over the place. That's how they get those cool inverted pictures and spread international relations.
They're still alive in the current test, by the way.
There you go. That's always a good thing. No flat spins out to sea.
Nope. And here you have examples of some of the 3D printed units that Doug makes. So on the left, you got the A7 Corsair again, and on the right, you got a MiG-29, which is painted up in that's Warsaw Pact rust for this game. So the final pieces that come out will have similar color schemes to this for these factions. But anyway, just some more examples of pieces here.
Now, will the pieces come out printed in the colors, or will they just be all one color and then it's up to the players to paint them as they choose?
Well, we hope to have the colors. I mean, the plan is plastic injection for everything.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, and then anything that you want to buy that's an add-on or an expansion, you'd have to paint yourself. Like Doug printed these in 3D. And if we get to the point and we say, yeah, we should have a MiG-29 represent whatever for this faction, then it'll go into the mold and it'll come in that color for that faction.
Okay.
And you can see the flight stands there. A lot of guys like to put, their aircraft on flight stands. It just makes them stand out. It makes them pop. But then those flight stand markers help identify the type of unit that it is. I mean, I know when I look at an A7 there on the left that it's an attack fighter in 85, but new people, especially in the game, they don't always know that, And so that marker at the bottom there helps identify that as an attack fighter in 85. And then, what I do, and I don't know if we'll continue this in the game or not, but I put that symbol on the battle board so that when you're going to the battle board to engage in combat, that you put that in the right place and you're rolling the right amount of dice at the right level for that unit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I like the whole idea of the same thing you were saying on the flight stand, makes it pop on the table. And then I would do that as well, just because, I'm going to look and say, okay, I've got this many fixed wing assets here, but what are they? Just by looking at the bottom, I'm not going to necessarily want to spend any time looking at the models. And of course it becomes second nature. It's very much second nature for you because you're designing the game, but for the gamer, they're going to just look at the symbology to know what they've got there. And it's a lot faster to do that. We got some more here too.
There's some US air power here. You got the F-15 Eagle on the left there. In the middle, you've got the F-4 Phantom. And on the right, you've got the F-16, and you can see here, it kind of demonstrates what we were just talking about. That F4 and that F16 are the same unit in the game because they're on the same marker. Even though they look different and the sculpts are different, they're going to fight, move, defend exactly the same in the game.
These models look fantastic. I really love the look of them because those are 3 sexy aircraft right there, and they look great.
In the non-sexy realm, but very capable, we have the
Hey, Rotary's just as sexy, I'll tell you. You got the Black Shark for the Soviets?
Yeah. This is an MI8. Doug just got these done a couple of months ago, and they are awesome. And those rotors are super sturdy. They don't break easily at all. I use the shorter. Doug sells 2 types of flight stands. He sells a shorter one and a taller one. I use the shorter ones for the helicopters and the taller for the jets, and they look great. And so AirCab is in the game, and it's what you would think. It's troops who ride on helicopters into combat, and they have a decent range. They can fly over 1C zone. You got to watch these guys. You got to make sure you've got some anti-aircraft or some air units that can block and defend against these guys, or they can take a territory that you think is defended and it's not.
Nice. Yeah, do you have that was one of the ones I asked you first, the Kamov 50, the Black Shark for the Soviets?
I don't. We don't have that one yet.
That was an attack helicopter for them. That was a sexy one too. It was kind of like one of those so ugly it was sexy, but I think it was badass looking.
We'll have to look into that, Doug. Hey, somebody asked a question. I'm going to show you just the size. So the MI8 we were just looking at, I'm going to hold it up right now.
Okay.
So you can see how big it is, in reference to me. So.
Oh, that's good size. And look at those propellers, man. They're nice and thick. Like that.
Problem is, I forgot where I got this from. Oh no, I remember now. There's a chip sitting there. This guy's getting ready to invade Turkey next turn. All right. And then the last thing here, and then I do want to quickly talk about nukes if everybody's okay with that. U.S. attack bomber unit. This is the F-111 Aardvark. And Doug just recently did this one too. This actually was a unit that we added to the game recently. And, my mantra lately in playtesting has been take stuff out of the game. And, but we realized we didn't have this. And it also, there's a medium bomber in 36, and we didn't really have that represented in this game, and we wanted to. So we added this back in. And, of course, for the Soviets, this would be the Su-24 Fencer. And so anyway, I thought Doug did a super nice job, and you can see the ordnance there under the wing. I think looks really great. You can even see the cockpit there, and envision two guys sitting in tandem there in that cockpit.
Yeah, no, that is really sharp looking. Doug did a great job with these. Absolutely, they're just beautiful looking models, and that's one of the things when you're playing a game, people don't maybe necessarily think about that until they see it. And you're at a convention, you're walking by, and you see these models on a table in this big expansive map, and especially if you get somebody that decides to print them or paint them up, I should say, and paint them up with looking with the camouflage and everything else, it really is going to be an eye popper, and it's going to be a real attention getter, because people are going to come over and say, wow, even just painted in the color, the country colors, it's still going to be impressive. But if you get somebody and there's going to be people that do it out there that are going to camouflage them up, go with the proper paint scales or paint schemes and everything, and it's going to look really, really impressive on the table. And that's because Doug's done such a great job with the models themselves.
Hey, Mo.
Yeah.
Here you go. K50 Black Shark.
There you go.
Oh, nice.
It's got the twin. I broke one of the blades, so right now I'm going back to get it reinforced. But I had one of my designers ask about the KA50, and so I got it modeled. But that's part of the testing is we print it, and then we find out where the weak spots are on it, and what we have to do to make the model more.
Mo, Doug is like Santa Claus.
Yes, he is. I'm noticing that.
All the time. He is like Santa. He'll be like, "Hey, Chris, I sent you some stuff, and I got some surprises in there for you." And you open it up, and it's F-111s, that you don't have. And so yeah, he does stuff like that all the time.
Now, people can buy these pieces themselves for their own games if they want to trick out, maybe a board war game that they've got, right?
Some of them we haven't really Global War 1936. We pretty much got everything you need.
Sure.
In Global War 1914, we just there's a lot of 3D stuff you can buy, check out your board, but we haven't released any of the plastic injection. I think we talked, being a small business, there's so many models.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, everything you see Chris has, we have the model and we printed it. And you see all that ordnance, really cool. But when you go to plastic injection, it's almost impossible to plastic inject ordnance on aircraft because of all the voids and the recesses there. You could have to really make it generic. And we do have that model with no ordnance, just so I can do plastic injection. So when I started 3D printing, I went back to my modeler and said, hey, I want ordnance on this stuff. So I had to do research. Right now I'm getting ready to release the F-35 and the A, B, and C version, the stealth version, which no ordnance on the, on the outside wing, since it carried most of it inside, but also have some on the outside. Then I have one called Beast Mode, which has all these stinking missiles on it. Of course, and that way people can pick what they want. Of course, the A and the B at that scale, they look almost exactly alike. We all know that the B is the V-stall version. Hatch pops up, for the thrust. But the C is definitely different looking. It's a little larger. Wings are a little different, things like that. So we try to I try to make things as best I can historically and detailed and everything else. And I'm a big hardware person. I grew up, knowing ships and planes. My dad was Navy, so I was always into that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Now let's talk real briefly about the length of the rule book currently, so that way people understand what we're talking about. About that, it's grown up AA is really what is ANA.
Yeah, it's not so like Global War 36 is about a 72-page rule book, as an example, and these are not 72 pages of war game rules, right? This is bigger font, pictures, this type of stuff. So Global War 85 right now, I think, is in about the same range. It might even be high 60s in terms of number of pages.
So you're still talking like 30 to 40 pages of actual rules, minus all the images and things like that, if you were to condense it down. So that's a good, good density of rules. It's not like it's going to be, hey, it's actually 6 pages of rules.
No. Plus when I print the rule book for playtest, I have to get it spiral bound. So like, plus there are reference sheets. There are 7 factions in the game, and so there are reference sheets for every faction, and they have some special abilities and conditions. Like the Warsaw Pact faction, their right now their mechanized infantry don't suffer river penalties in combat because the Soviets and the Eastern Europeans had a lot of amphibious APC capability at that particular time. And so, but that's only on their reference sheet. And so in Global War, you not only have to know the rule book, you got to know all of the reference sheets, because you might do something in the game and take a territory, and in 85, I didn't realize that might make it more likely that I might get nuked because I took that territory,
Yeah.
So you have to know all of the faction special abilities and conditions as well in the game, because we do model that on the reference sheets.
Okay. And then also briefly, how does combat work? I mean, is it going to be just like straight dice off between the 2 sides that are in combat, or is there going to be a CRT with modifiers that apply, or is any modifiers going to be applied to like removing dice from a dice pool, that sort of thing? How, just a generality, general overview.
It is an Axis and Allies style combat system, but much more involved and with a lot more things like target select. If an A10 rolls a certain low number, it might not just be a hit in combat. You might be able to select an enemy tank like a T-80 as a casualty. And there's penalties for terrain. So your attack strength might be reduced if you're attacking into a mountain territory, or if you're attacking across a river or into a desert territory. Your combat strength can be reduced for that as well. And also we have first strike, so artillery gets first strike, defensive AA gets first strike, missiles, anti-ship missiles and cruise missiles get first strike. So if they get a hit, and the enemy unit that gets taken as a casualty doesn't even get a shoot in combat.
Okay.
And so anyway, it's standard, roll a number or less to hit, take casualties, and go on, but it's a lot more involved than your traditional Axis and Allies combat system.
So, I mean, it's simple but complex at the same time, which is good. You know what your target number is going to be, but that's going to be affected by all the other things too. So it's not like you have to break out any slide rule and figure out a formula or anything. So I like the fact that you're adding the complexity without overburdening the rule set.
Absolutely.
That's cool. But I think we've got anybody else have any questions in here? I want to get them in before we let these guys go. So make sure to get your questions in now. We've got one from Goler Videos. He says, will expansion sets be planned like in 1936, or do those just evolve as people have ideas?
We do. We're going to try to have some expansions available when the game launches. I can't guarantee that, though, because it might take every bit of our strength just to get this base game out the door. But rest assured, we've got enough good and tested ideas already that we've put on the shelf that can serve as expansions for the game.
One of them being space.
Yes, exactly.
I like that.
Yeah, we'll have a basic space in the game. But, I mean, I've got 3D printed space shuttles and stuff that we haven't been able to work into the base game, but you can bet we're going to try to release those in expansion. ASW air units is another one that I think if we get an expansion out with the game, we might be able to get ASW separate ASW air assets as an expansion that can bolt on easily to the rules of the game, as an example. And nukes also. Brian mentioned nukes. I've got a list of nukes. I mean, in the game we just have an ICBM unit, but take the U.S. as an example. They had Titan IIs with 9 megaton warheads still in service in 1985. They also had Minuteman IIIs, with I think 6 or 8 200 kiloton MIRVs. That's a pretty big difference in power there. And so, we could do an expansion on that, which would, that Titan II would just obliterate anything that it hits, I would think. But anyway, so we might be able to do a nuke expansion. And then, Mo, I think I want to just briefly talk about nukes as well. Nukes are going to be in the game. Nukes are probably one of the major reasons why we didn't have a war anytime between 1945 and 1989 globally. But we looked for a model. We have torn our hair out about nukes in this game, because what Doug said is you wanted them in the game, but he didn't want them to be overpowering.
Yes.
Then you take into account that the two sides had an imbalance in how they use nukes. The Soviets had many more first strike weapons, and the NATO alliance had many more second strike weapons, although they were trying to change that. So I read a book called Inadvertent Escalation, which finally gave me, the impetus that I needed. So basically, in the game, you can do things to inadvertently escalate to the use of nuclear weapons. And, if you take a territory next to your opponent's nuclear weapons themselves, and your opponent feels like those weapons are going to be threatened, they are more likely to use them in the game. And we have a system for how you can get release of nuclear weapons if your weapons themselves are threatened. You can bet that if the Soviets see the U.S. almost ready to acquire SDI technology, that makes it more likely that they would want to launch a first strike of their weapons in the game. So we found that, and we found that it makes you think about how you wage conventional war in the game. As an example, if the U.S. stealth fighters in 1985 had launched attacks in Western Ukraine against supply and logistics and radar facilities, the Soviets relied on a lot of those radars to detect Pershing II launches that would have been hitting them. So if their ability to detect a nuclear launch is itself threatened, then they're going to be more likely to use nuclear weapons. And so we have a model in the game now that takes that into account. And you have to be careful about where you go and where you attack, or you might just trigger the ability of your opponent to use nukes against you.
So you're going to have nuclear weapons. You're going to also have bio and chem, or are you just going to stick with nuclear? You're not going to do the full spectrum?
We've never had bio in the game. It's always been on sort of the idea list. But we did have chem in the game for a while, and we took it out because it was just too difficult to figure out how it would work. And so we've been in the mode of, if we can't get it to work in a couple of playtests, we're just going to put it on the shelf, and we'll come back to it as an expansion if and when the game is popular, and we'll provide it. So I think I know how I would do chem if we release an expansion for that. But we definitely have battlefield nuclear weapons. We have theater level intermediate nukes, and we have strategic nukes. But the thing I want the listeners to know is this game ends either when the nuclear fallout levels reach a certain level that war weariness would set in, or everybody's getting ready to launch all of their weapons and the world would end anyway. So we end the game before that happens, but you are able to use nukes under certain circumstances in the game. It's more limited exchanges. We don't give you access to all of the weapons because that would go too far, but we do let you use them under certain circumstances.
Yeah, at the end of the game, if it comes down to right before nuclear Armageddon, it's like looking glass is in the air, and that the president is now airborne and he's off the ground. Bad things are going to happen. So.
Absolutely.
But that's pretty interesting. Anybody else have any last questions here? Doug, did you have any last things you'd like to add in as well?
Well, I know I've seen a few people chime in and saying, hey, this is kind of a new thing. It's kind of neat the way you're doing it. As we were working on a Pacific game for some of our games, and I think I showed you earlier, I have a lot of counter games, and I went through one by one of every Pacific game I had and went through the rules. And when I found something that I thought was really neat, I wrote it down. So I had like 4 pages of ideas. And, people will always say, well, this was my idea. Now I see that you guys are doing it now. Now I kind of smirk and I don't really say anything. I'm like, man, I got games from the 70s that idea was in. We're definitely not the first ones to come out with certain things in our games. Every now and then, maybe. I know like America, when Mike designed, the lead designer, the way he did the combat on it is very unique. It's a neat system. A lot of people like it. Don't know if it's brand new or not, but it's a neat system. But I went through those 15, did all this, and then I'm like going to my designer and say, okay, this is really cool. How can we get it to work? We can't do it as a counter game because it's too complex, but we need to somehow make a marriage in there. And some of them, like Chris was saying, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, because of the level we're at. So it really does bring the people who are really into the counter games. If you don't mind coming down a level, I think someone says, how long does it take to play? Global War 1936 takes a weekend. You're talking all day Saturday, all day Sunday, and maybe even Friday night if you start in 36. So 85, I'm sure, is not going to be the main global game, the full blown game. What do you think, Chris? It's going to take a full weekend?
Yeah, the full global game of 85, I think, will be playable in a day and a half. So you're still going to need maybe a Friday night and a full Saturday, maybe even a little bit of Sunday. But I think that's one thing that's unique about 85 is we're going to have these scenarios in, like the Pacific Theater scenario is only going to take 8 to 10 hours to play. And the rest of the world, the Red Thunder one, so Europe, Middle East, Africa, South America, that's going to take, I think, 10 to 12 hours to play. And then the full game, it depends on how many players you have too, Doug. If you have 7 players, the full global game is going to play faster, actually, than if you only have 3 and everybody's having to do everything.
Right. I'm sure.
So if you have 7 players, you might be able to bite off the whole global game in a full day, if you start early and go late. Because if you don't have to think about more than one faction, it's going to play faster.
Now, when you play a multiplayer game like that, like 7 players, is there going to be somebody that is going to be kind of overseeing each side, or is it just going to be everybody's going to be running their own little segment of the war for their faction? And
it's a 3-faction game, and we don't have any supreme commander roles in the game for each faction. But the NATO alliance is the U.S. Global Command, NATO itself in Western Europe, and the U.S. Pacific Command. Those 3 factions. The Warsaw Pact Alliance is the Soviet Global Command, the Soviet Far East Command, and the Warsaw Pact, which is the Eastern European countries. And then the 3rd faction is China itself. That is a separate faction. So, I guess if you wanted to have a supreme commander, it might help, where you got somebody focused really on goals and objectives as opposed to strategies and tactics. That could be fun. In fact, I think we're going to try something like that in our playtest in 2 weeks, where I'm going to be the NATO supreme commander. And I'm just going to be like, protect Iceland, but I'm not going to tell you how. That's up to you.
Exactly. And then it could also be interesting for the commander's perspective if, you give old Bob Jones over here, hey, go do that. And then he never reports to you. So you don't know what the status is over there, and
that could be
like,
fun.
well, what the hell's going on over there, guys? And then you find out he lost. You're like, how'd you lose?
That's right.
That could be fun. But something like that. If you can maybe even create a smaller or something that can be done in like 4 hours or say, and then you can bring that to conventions and or to local game stores, get that in there, and 4 to 6 hours is like an afternoon. You can get more people to test it out and then try it out and play the game themselves. And then you can say, you like this? Well, this is just a tiny taste. We got this whole thing that can take like a whole weekend for you to play if you want. Yeah. So that would be interesting too, I think.
Yeah. Hey, and Moe, and going back, we spend a lot of time at HBG, all the designers researching. So these games aren't just thrown together and say, hey, here's a little infantry guy. We actually have, if my guys need reference books, I always tell them, if there's a book or there's a game you need as reference, send it, let me know. I'll either buy it, send it to them, have them buy it, reimburse them, and whatever, so we can research. I think I showed you earlier, I've got bookshelves of books.
Yeah.
And
you do. You don't want to share that because it's a little messy looking, but wow, you got a nice stack over there.
My wife says it looks like a bomb went off, and I need to clean it. I say that it gets cleaned and then it gets trashed because let me show you.
Oh, we're gonna take a look.
So as you can see, there's all the books, a lot of them. I got games piled up there. All my games.
Whoops. Let me remove that.
Where am I at?
There we go. Now I just wanted to put that up on the screen. I hit the wrong thing. There you go.
There's a bunch of Europas down there. Yeah. And all my airplanes. And I got stuff over here. So there's more games. Can you even, sorry.
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay. But that's
Saturn 5. Nice.
Yeah, we got a lot of stuff. So
You even got some air cover. I like that.
Yeah. This is my little this is an office in my warehouse. Not in the warehouse, but in the same area. Warehouse is down the hall.
Nice.
So, this is my man cave. I don't have one at my own home. So
see, it's not that bad. Hathawell's saying it's a dream office.
Yeah. So I got plenty of games, but we use them for reference. So there's always new things coming out. I sold Chris a couple, didn't I sell you Iron Sky or?
You sold me 1985 Under an Iron Sky. You did.
That one, yeah.
That's why he buys 2 copies.
Well, I have another copy, second edition. And so, but yeah, we do a lot of research, lots, a lot of, I've got Excel spreadsheets of missiles and all this stuff. I mean, right now with Will and I are researching for the new 2025, and we spent a year before we even started designing Global War 36, just where all the ships were, who had what. I've got spreadsheets of all that stuff. So we try to make it as historical as we can, but then you have to take some liberties,
Sure.
So, but, because there's always someone that really knows a piece of history is like, well, I didn't have that. And you did this. Well, we represented it by this ship because they could not have this big battleship. So we had to give them a cruiser, or we had to give them a destroyer and a, torpedo boat destroyer because their ships, weren't as good or something like that. So,
yeah. I mean, there's always going to be, balances you have to, make from reality to a game to get it to be enjoyable and playable.
Yeah, Mo, I've spent a lot of time with my nose in books like The Military Balance, 1985, 1986, books like The Global Military Balance that the Department of Defense funded in 80 and again in 85, books like Soviet Military Power from 1985. And Doug has just liberally supported all of that research. And I mean, I'm constantly still getting books. I had 3 more arrive last week. That
nice.
That one was called NATO: A Defense of the West. The other one's called A Nuclear Fact Book. Anything that was written in the early to mid 80s, in that era, we try to get our hands on.
Plus, you can always download all the old FMs that are obsolete from the 80s and the 70s and 80s, leading up to the 80s. That operations, things like that you can gain a sense of what the SOPs were and what the thought process was at the time and stuff like that too. But
they even give you ideas, like Carlos mentioned Soviet Military Power there in the chat. Like, yeah, that's a great book because you can even get projections there. Like, it's like, hey, what are the Soviets gonna do from here? It's not just what they're doing now, and that gives us ideas for things like technology in the game. What can we maybe introduce that might be a little futuristic from a 1985 standpoint? So books like that are just fantastic for that.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And the thing is, if it's a business expense, it's a tax deduction. So that's something you can do with your man cave. If it's at your office, it's not a man cave at that point. It's a business expense.
Oh, trust me, I know. I've said this as much as I can to my accountant, but sadly, I still pay a lot of taxes.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, that's the thing that we all have to deal with here with that. But I think that's great, and it's great. It says a lot about HVG and your attitude about doing all the research and making sure that everything is as accurate as possible, and then make the balance changes as needed to make it an enjoyable game as well. And I think everybody understands that those liberties have to be taken in order to have a fun game.
I'll give you an example of that. Like, sometimes we can tend to go to what looks cooler, on the table, but maybe it doesn't reflect reality. Like the Bradley infantry fighting vehicle, as cool as that looks, that wasn't as prevalent in U.S. units in 85 as the M113 was.
113 was, yeah, that was everywhere.
Absolutely. So it's kind of, Doug and I both kind of caught that, and it was looking at one of those books. It was actually the global military balance book that I went back in there and looked and like, well, I'll be like, they actually had more M113s.
Yeah.
So we made that change, and Doug printed new units, and we shifted from using the Bradleys to the M113s just to make it more historical.
Yeah, they weren't just used for troop carriers either. At that point, M113s were incredibly versatile before they came to their end of life. They were used for tow missiles, for tow launch. There were ITVs, I think they were, and then fist Vs as well. So that way you can have your forward observers and things like that were in those vehicles. They were also command vehicles as well. So the Bradley was the next gen, and that was being integrated at that point.
Yep.
It wasn't as widespread at that in that time period.
Absolutely. A great example.
Yeah. So really cool. But any last thoughts from either one of you guys? Doug?
No, I appreciate you giving us the time and the venue to show off this stuff. And I think in May I don't have anything going. I might try to get down to Dallas convention. I think it'd be kind of neat to go down there and check it out.
Oh yeah, I think it'd be great to have you guys come down, and especially if we get we announce it ahead of time and maybe come up with an idea to run a small scenario to get some interest, and then maybe a longer scenario that may take a day, or if you want to try to go for the whole weekend, I would say we can talk about that and see what would be the best way of approaching it. Maybe have a whole weekend thing going, or a whole day where people can come in and out as they choose. Like people come in and do a little bit and play for a couple hours, and then they go have lunch. Somebody else steps in and checks it out. I think that would be kind of neat too.
Yeah, well, that's gonna be harder for Chris. He's still a family man, kids at home and everything. I'm an empty nester, so just my wife and I and 2 puppies. So
yeah, we'll try, Mo. I want to get you to a play test, Mo, if I can.
I know. I gotta figure out how to do that.
Yeah. We're gonna need 7 players. We're gonna need 7 players. So
it'll be a lot of fun. I think this would just be so much fun to play, especially 7 players, because like you said, it would go faster, but it would also it depends on the knowledge level of the player, and also depends on the style of the player, because some people are crafty and think it all through, and then you have guys like me that are just like, all right, what do we got to take? That okay, straight ahead.
That's right.
No fainting. I'm just going right up the gut.
That's right.
So would you drive down there or fly down there?
To where?
Indianapolis.
Probably fly. I mean, rather than drive, I'd probably fly.
Yeah, I'm supposed to fly, like I said, in 2 weeks, and with all these cancellations going on. Until Chris, last time I was supposed to come, we canceled. I canceled, I should say. I told him, I says, well, if they're flying, there's things going on with the flying, and looks like I'm just going to drive. It's a long drive to Indianapolis. I think it's 11 hours.
Oh, wow. From where? Tulsa?
Tulsa, yeah.
Yeah, so
but I drove to Phoenix 16 hours, and I drove straight through. I had my wife drive for 1 hour so I could rest my eyes, and we did it straight through. So I can drive. It's not a problem with that. So I've got to make the play test. So, it comes to a point where you've got to go and check it out and see what's going on.
Yeah.
But the reason I was asking is, I got a lot of miles on my car, and I can get you a plane ticket, use my miles, get you a plane ticket to go see Chris.
Nice. That'll be cool. We'll have to talk about that. And, we need to, it would be cool if we can get Chris down here and then turning it into a playtest weekend of sorts.
Down where you're at?
Yeah, for that convention. We can.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
We'll talk about that. We'll see what we can do. But and the other thing too is, do you have any digital implementation of the game that you guys are using for any testing, or is it all just hands-on?
I wish I did, honestly. Any other game I design, I'm going to design digitally first. That's one learning for me from this. But I don't have time to design and test this game and learn how to use a tool.
Sure.
I just don't know how to use a tool. And so, I shouldn't say I don't know. I don't know at the level I need to know. So, but yeah, what I've got to think about, Mo, is as we move towards the release of this game is how do we support something like playing this on Tabletop Simulator? Do we want to do that officially, or do we want to let that happen organically? But, any future game I work on, it would be nice to have some type of digital system, to test.
Yeah. I mean, for testing, I think it's important.
Yeah.
We've reached out a couple times to Tabletop Simulator, me, We've actually had 3 people from HBG, and we've never got a response.
Well, we'll talk about that offline because I got some ideas on that, and we can discuss that further because I think digital implementation for testing is a must nowadays because it saves all the prototype printing, all that stuff, and if you can just get like obviously you still need art and you'll still need models. You get those, you can just roll them into something like TTS mod, and then it's all up to the player. There's no rules enforcement. Now you can do scripting and stuff in TTS where it does have some, aspects done, but generally you're going to be moving the stuff around just like you would on a regular table, but there's no prototype costs except for time.
There's one of my young designers and I are designing a game. It's called War Plans of the Americas. I don't know if you're familiar with Avalanche Press's War Plans series, red, black, gold, orange. I've always been fascinated by that. So finally, I had one of my designers said, "Hey, I would be interested in that." Well, he's a young whippersnapper, not old guy like Chris who doesn't know Tabletop Simulator. And so we've got it on tabletop, and like you said, we've got the map. So we update the map digitally and just upload it, and you can go get models from other places on tabletop. It doesn't have to be the exact model. We just need, that's a tank, that's an infantry guy,
sure,
whatever. And we're modeling. So like you said, don't have to 3D print anything. The only thing we have to do is update the map. And so that's something him and I work on. And I think as we're moving forward, some of my designers are not. They're old school and they won't learn it, don't have time to learn it. But people like Chris, who eventually probably will learn it down the road, and some of my other ones. So
the only thing I struggle with is importing 3D models. I mean, Doug's got all the 3D models that we would need. He's printed them for me.
True.
But importing those into Tabletop Simulator is not as easy as it sounds. And
well, that would be something that it would be, I think it would behoove you to get somebody who knew how to do all that stuff. And that way you can relieve the designers of the games from having to worry about that. Just let the digital implementer handle that aspect, and then the designer just designs. I think that'd be the best angle to go with.
Probably.
But that's probably more of an offline conversation than it is during a show. But we'll end it here. And if anybody has one last second question, this is your final call here as we're going to wrap this up. But I want to say thank you to both Doug and Chris for joining us today and giving us a look at Global War 1985, as well as a look into historical board gaming. And I had posted the site up again. I'm going to post it again. I posted it in the channel before. Make sure you go to historicalboardgaming.com and check out all of the games that are already there, and then the games that are upcoming that you can get. I think you have a newsletter there as well, Doug, that you can join up with.
Yes.
Yeah, because I'm on the newsletter. I get it sent to me, but I didn't see it when I looked at the site real quick. I was just, because I'm doing multiple things here. But make sure you sign up for the newsletter. You can keep track of everything that's coming out from Historical Board Gaming, and I really appreciate everybody's time today, Chris and Doug, and as well as the audience. And we will be seeing you guys on the next show. I know Ardwolf has one coming up here at the top of the hour, and I'm going to be back here in a couple hours with Bruce Maxwell as we talk about Air and Armor. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We will see you on the next show. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks.